Let's take a look at what's going on in Israel and our country. Let's look at the broad horizon first. Joe Biden has said many wonderful things about Israel and the Jewish people. He's promised munitions and other resources. He has sent 2 carrier groups to the Mediterranean. And he'll say more inspiring things with passion and emotion as he did the other night. And people will be very grateful. Jewish groups will come out and thank him as they have. Israeli groups will come out and thank him as they have. They'll be very grateful, but there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes and a lot of things going on in our country, which has lit fires in our country and all over the world in the last 2.5 years. And I'm not going to play games about this stuff. I'm not going to cover it up. There needs to be accountability. Let me be clear. The Obama-Biden policies in the Middle East and their foreign policy generally have unleashed holy hell throughout the world against our country and against the little state of Israel. Policies matter. Actions or inaction matters. Statements matter. There's a war in Europe. Russia invaded Ukraine the last 2 years or so. There's a war in Israel. Communist China is aggressive and openly belligerent. Everybody knows they're going to invade Taiwan. North Korea is back to threatening South Korea and shooting missiles all over the place. Iran, which was in tatters economically just 2.5 years ago, with its people rising up against the regime there, is now flush with oil money. The popular uprising has been brutally put down, and Iran has rearmed and has proxies, armed proxies in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, in Iraq. And under Obama's deal, his so-called nuclear deal, can now make and sell missiles as of last week with no effective opposition from our government. And there's no plan to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, which it will quite soon. What a disaster. Our border has been wide open for 2.5 years with millions entering our country illegally without being vetted, and a human catastrophe like we've never seen on our southern border. Would-be terrorists, criminals, drug cartel operatives, fentanyl killing 100,000 Americans a year, illegal weapons pouring into our communities, an economic, cultural, and national security nightmare the last 2.5 years. Massive domestic spending, and they're not done, has destroyed many aspects of our economy. It is destroying our currency, fueling record inflation, middle-class impoverishment, and undermining capital investment and stifling economic growth, which have reached record levels in the last 2.5 years. Our 100% all-volunteer military cannot meet its recruitment goals and hasn't for the last several years due to the intentional imposition of left-wing social policies and directives from gender identity, pronouns, CRT, indoctrination, and vaccine mandates. And our military is grossly underfunded. Federal law enforcement and Department of Justice prosecutors have been unleashed on pro-life protesters, parents at school board meetings, the Catholic Church, Republican activists, Trump supporters, and Trump himself, with the aim of convicting him for anything, destroying his campaign for president and imprisoning him for the rest of his life. That's the goal. And of course, who does that help? Biden and the Democrats. Local law enforcement has been eviscerated. Crime at all levels is destroying the civil society, our cities, our neighborhoods, our businesses, our families. Our schools have been turned into anti-American, anti-family, anti-faith, anti-parent indoctrination mills. Our colleges and universities are infested with American-hating and Jew-hating Marxists and pro-terrorist faculty members, Confucius institutes, Hamas-funded and supported so-called student groups who seek to destroy our country and Israel. And we fund it, all through our taxes and tuition, with no oversight by Congress or state legislatures or anybody. And in the last 2.5 years, we've gone from energy independent and an energy exporter to energy dependent on OPEC, Saudi Arabia in particular, and other hostile regimes. We've nationalized oil-producing land, millions of acres, shut down oil leases and pipelines, regulate fuel-using vehicles out of existence. And so now, soon, we will be compelled to buy electric vehicles, the vast majority of materials of which are controlled by the Communist Chinese, like so many of our industries. And folks, I could go on and on, so why am I doing this today of all days? Well, this has all happened in the last 2.5 years. In the last 2.5 years, when you consider all the decades before, the 2 centuries before, of how one generation after another came together to build up this country, to build it up economically, to secure it, to create prosperity in a vast middle class, to build up the biggest and strongest and most muscular military on the face of the earth, not because we're colonialists, not because we're imperialists, but because we are a nation that believes in peace, a people that believe in peace. As Reagan says and Trump says, peace through strength. We've sent men to all kinds of wars, all kinds of wars. World War II comes to mind, who fought for our freedom and fought for our liberty, put everything on the line. And it can all be destroyed in 2.5 years, all of it. Our massive economy, our technology, economic growth, our secure border, our military, law and order, the civil society, all being destroyed. And I'm supposed to sit here tonight and congratulate Joe Biden for his great leadership, while he and his Obama ideologues have unleashed on our country every disastrous policy one can imagine to fundamentally transform it into what? Into a bankrupt, weak nation that's lost its spirit? Look what it's done to Israel. They rearmed Iran after Donald Trump disarmed it. Iran was put in a box. Now it's out of its box. It's built up its military. It's going to have nukes. Imagine what that'll do, not just to the Middle East, but to us. The threats, the blackmail, and perhaps use of those nukes. Changes the whole thing. There's a new axis of evil. Biden has pushed China and Russia together. North Korea is now fully nuclearized, and then Iran. Those 4 countries, by the time they're done, are going to have a massive arsenal of nuclear weapons, not to mention their conventional weapons, and not to mention their geographic positioning. Communist China is in our hemisphere in a big way, Central and South America, over 20 bases, if you will, with spy bases. They are putting killer satellites in the sky to knock out our GPS systems, our satellites to blind our military and our population. They control both sides of the Panama Canal through contracts. They have a deep water port in the Solomon Islands where my great uncle fought during World War II. They have a base on the west coast of Africa for its Navy. And what are we doing? Nothing. Our military is stretched thin. We're not funding it commensurate to the challenges that we face. We have a commander-in-chief who has undermined our nation domestically and whose foreign policy is the greatest disaster of any president in American history. I had a friend of mine who served in the senior ranks of the Trump administration. The other day, he sends me a note and he says, you know, Mark, there's not a lot of space between you and me on what's been going on with Biden, but in the last 10 or 14 days, he's been terrific. The last 10 or 14 days, he's been terrific. Well, let's look at the last 10 or 14 days where he's been terrific. Has he cut off 1 penny from Iran because he would not enforce the oil restrictions that Donald Trump placed on? Not 1 penny. He's even afraid to mention Iran most of the time. He doesn't want to offend them. The Palestinians, well, they received hundreds of millions of new dollars under Biden, which were cut off by Trump because Trump insisted that they stop their terrorism. Biden talks good game, but he funds their terrorism. We gave hundreds of millions of dollars up to $1 billion actually, to UNRWA, this UN organization that runs refugee services in Gaza. But it has no control over what happens to that money because the UN Security Council with China and Russia and the rest will not designate Hamas or Hezbollah as terrorist organizations. And so they're free to do with that money as they wish. And while he goes to Israel, passionately and emotionally speaks to the people of Israel, to the families who lost lives and so forth, behind the scenes, what are Blinken and Biden doing? They're tying Israel's hands. Israel not only has to fight this vile, vicious, Nazi-like terrorists, putting its IDF young men and women, its soldiers on the line, and I notice that the Biden administration never talks about their lives. What are they doing? They're telling Israel, you cannot violate the rules of war. Israel's not violating the rules of war. You cannot fight like the terrorists. Israel doesn't fight like the terrorists. You must feed and medicate the Palestinians in Gaza while you're trying to defeat Hamas. You must do this, you must do that, you mustn't do that. But don't worry, we have 2 fleets in the Mediterranean. But don't worry, I stand with you. But don't worry, I have your back. And I'll always have your back, today and in the future. Don't worry, I'll have your back. The reason why Blinken has been in that area for days, the reason why Biden went there, is not because they quote-unquote have Israel's back, although they are letting munitions flow, which I think any president but Obama would. It's because they're trying to negotiate a general peace. They're trying to say to the Palestinians in the Palestinian Authority, you stay out of this, which they already want to stay out of because Israel could deal with them very quickly. They're saying to Hezbollah, we have a fleet out here, don't you dare. Although they won't say what they mean by that. Just don't, don't. They won't say anything about Iran. They won't stop Iran. And in fact, Iran, the cap on their ability to make and sell missiles came off a few days ago without any word from the Biden administration. What they're trying to do is get Israel not to invade Gaza, but if they do invade Gaza, a soft invasion. A soft invasion. What do I mean by that? Well, don't go through there and take out the whole place. No, we can't do that. That would be like a terrorist. That would be inhumane. In other words, that would be like America during World War II and Britain during World War II and all the other allied countries during World War II, where we basically blew these countries off the face of the earth. We can't do that. No. Pinpricks. Do the best you can. Your soldiers need to feed, medicate, protect the civilians, even though Hamas is dressed like civilians. They need to go in the alleyways and in the rooms and in the houses where they're booby-trapped and the enemy's waiting for them. They need to make sure they don't hit any facilities that'll cause a PR problem, and we have your back. Biden doesn't have their back. He never has.
Want to see more Mark Levin? Go to LevinTV.com and subscribe now.